Welcome back to That's So Second Millennium. This is episode 53, where we continue our interview with Jay Martin and Chris Baglow of the McGrath Institute for Church Life, the University of Notre Dame, and their talking about their Science and Religion initiative to bring the inspiration that science and faith can be reconciled to Catholic high school teachers in particular across the country.
Does the other trend that's going on in modern society, relativism, make it harder or easier for schools to kind of try for this synthesis?
That's not something that we really encounter so much, mainly because, especially on a cultural level, relativism seems to be, you could say, it's a self-serving moral practice. Yeah. You know, they don't. Very few high school students are going to have anything like a metaphysical kind of anti-realism, in which, you know. Right. Yeah. But if you start telling them that what they're doing is wrong, or what their people that they're friends with are doing is wrong, then they'll say, well, it's wrong for you. And so what we tend to see is actually kind of a hyperrationalism with respect to our teachers. They want to say, okay, this is great, and it's very edifying to talk about God's loving intent in creating human beings. But I want to know, what are the facts? And so there's a hyperrationalism that makes a sort of procedural cut along, across the range of facts, as if God creating human beings in love is not a fact, and human beings having a common ancestor with apes is a different. It's a fact. It's a facts fact.
Yeah, right.
But there's a sort of epistemic superiority.
Absolutely.
But
and it's procedural.
The interesting thing in terms of relativism, and this idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth or any of those kinds of ideas. The fact that one place where most people, even people who claim to be relativists in some fashion or other, remain realists, is in their acceptance of science.
Right.
Science does put you in touch with the truth. Science does show you facts. It's interesting that by bringing faith and science into dialogue, they can begin to see that there are truths of faith, right? Yeah. That can be seen in light of science, and by bringing those two together, opens their minds to the possibility. Look, water really is two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom and one molecule.
Yeah.
And maybe God really is 1 and 3.
Right.
Not that those two truths are necessarily directly related, but the point is that to begin to see that because theology can be robust and responsive in a respectful way to science. Yeah. Maybe theology has something to tell us too.
Yeah.
And that's and I think that's one way in which relativism, it's like kicking in the back door of relativism.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you go and give your class a module on why relativism is wrong. And they might shut their minds from the beginning. If you're going to talk about evolution and creation and why they're different and why they're complementary, you're eroding the relativistic idea kind of, in a less direct but more effective way.
It reminds me of the phrase, the truth shall set you free. If you can accept the truth can exist somewhere, then you're suddenly free to accept the truth can exist elsewhere.
Precisely. Precisely.
Yeah. And truth is restless. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about doing the work that we do. You can start to establish a set of truths, and by sort of truth's nature, it always is expanding. There's always more truth to be known. Yeah. And it connects itself to other things, and before you know it, you believe a whole heck of a lot of things.
Right.
And you take them to be true.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, and I think sometimes it's overstated. I think it can be overstated. That sometimes lines are drawn. Like I remember reading a book by Dulubach. What is it? I forget which one. The title probably may come to you, but I mean, he mentions more in passing. It's not. I don't think
What's the actual. Book about?
It's like Nature and Grace. I think that's the book.
Right.
And he mentions, I think, a number of places in passing some things that really set us sort of. I read them and I looked at them. And I said, I don't know that I believe. You know exactly where the boundary between theology and science is. And there are, so for example, one thing that works, it works in Aquinian theology, should work in philosophy, it certainly works in science, is if you find an internal contradiction in your theory. In some sense, my theory can explain observations, but if I've got an internal contradiction, who's going to accept it? No one's going to accept my theory about how the asteroid Vesta formed if there's a logical contradiction in it.
Right.
And that will work the same way, that should work in a good theologic argument or discussion just as well.
We had a question at the Gulf Coast Conference about similar questions, and one of the kind of most compelling strategies is to ask the questions of self-reference. Okay, so a statement like, there's no such thing as absolute truth. Well,
yes.
How does that how are we expected to take that statement as being absolutely true or not?
Right.
At that point, I mean,
right. A classic.
Right, you're sort of an infinite regress very quickly.
Yeah. You've annihilated yourself immediately upon contact. Maybe there's no such thing as absolute truth. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Then what?
Right. And then what are you even saying?
Then what am I, I'm sorry. I consume that much oxygen. I'm just sorry. Yeah.
In the schools where you've seen this working so far, does it even tend to affect not just the science teachers and the religion teachers, but is there suddenly some kind of openness to the truth anew that it gets the mathematics teachers and the sociology teachers and everything else to getting together more, perhaps on a common syllabus kind of approach?
Well, I think, one of the things just from our recent trip to Holy Cross High School was some of I think it was a sociology teacher, wanted to know, okay, this is great. You've given us an idea of what integration looks like with science, the natural sciences and religion, but what about the social sciences? Right. So I think for teachers who aren't directly, employed to promote the science and religion dialogue, we show that integrated curriculum is possible. And they wanted to know, okay, let's talk about other things. How do we do this in our own fields? How do we do this with psychology, sociology, economics, whatever it might be?
Yeah.
And it's proof that this is possible. There's no reason to think that a successfully integrated science and religion curriculum is limited only to science and religion. There's nothing inherently structural about science and religion that allows integration these other disciplines don't. So we give teachers who aren't in the field a chance to see, this is, analogically, this is what it looks like. You can do it too, and let's talk about that when we have a chance.
Yeah. And there's a famous document from the Sacred Congregation for Catholic Education. So this is the church's congregation that deals with issues of Catholic education. Yeah. And this was the first document that was produced, I think, by the congregation after Vatican II. It was in 1977. Okay. And it's called The Catholic School.
Okay.
And there's a quote in there that says that the task of a Catholic school is to create a synthesis of faith and culture, reached by integrating all of human knowledge through the subjects taught in the light of the gospel. So what we're doing in faith and science is really just one place.
Yeah, and it's arguably the hardest place.
Yeah. For instance, I would love to see, if I could add one thing to all of this, right away, the first thing I would say would be faith and literature. Faith in the arts in general.
Okay.
Because I honestly think that an engagement of a person's imagination is even more potent in some ways, right, than simply teaching them theological doctrine.
Yeah.
If you're engaging if you're helping instill in them a Catholic imagination, then, being able to see literature through a Catholic lens and that kind of thing. You're giving them a vision of the world that they won't easily throw away.
Yeah.
That'll be something that remains with them and that they'll actually cherish about their own education. Yeah. Yeah. So there's an area. But psychology, sociology, we get a lot of mathematics teachers who come and participate in our events, and they'll generally get a lot from what we do in physics.
Yeah.
And some of the mathematical issues in physics and that kind of thing. We'll get some benefit there. But it would be great to see it. And history would be the next.
Yes. Oh, in fact.
Literature and, integration in literature and faith, in theology, integration of history and theology. These are ripe for the picking and need to begin happening.
Yeah. And sort of a much broader understanding of, that Catholicism is not just about rules. We have dogmas. We do. Yeah. We do have a certain number of dogmas. think really, if you were to sit them all, not the catechism, because God bless the bishops who wrote the catechism, but they got a little wordy. I think there is room for, the magisterium to turn to an idea of what is a solid, but, close to the minimum reducible logical content of, okay, these are the things that have been bequeathed to us by revelation.
Right.
There's not a huge number of things, and to do a little bit of attempt to sort out tradition with a large T from tradition with a small T, because we don't, and as among other things, an aid to sort of separating our identity as Catholics from our identity with whatever branch of a political spectrum we might be on.
Right.
Which is another side of the whole dialogue, history. What's politics, but sort of the froth at the surface of history,
right.
In a sense. That's where we're at right now, but it's all due to that. Yeah. But that is a beautiful idea that's, and again, I think almost doing religion, being able to bridge the faith and physical science is almost, well, we did the hardest one. Mm-hmm. Let's go back and do, in some ways it's the hardest, but in some ways there's just so much more to do, I guess, with the social sciences and history or literature. I hadn't even thought about that until you mentioned it, but of course that's right. And of course, what did being itself do when it emptied itself and became man? It told a lot of stories.
There you go.
That's right.
So to speak. Yeah.
Do you find a challenge from the principals, because not only because of all of the challenges we've talked about already, but there's just something about the nature of a high school that's intrinsically silo-driven. Teachers tend to think of themselves as kind of the lords and ladies of their classroom, and that some kind of imposition of a broader syllabus might endanger their knowledge and skills as a teacher. Or am I being very stereotypical there?
Well, we have had, a very, very small kind of territorial kind of response. But, we're talking about maybe a handful of people that come to our seminars. Well, we typically find, at least as people have come through our foundation seminars, is the real issue are sort of ideological differences within the broader departments who aren't represented at the conferences. So we've had several teachers who teach religion, and their colleagues are more or less, young earth creationists who challenge the prospects of her salvation for thinking that, we can actually talk about evolutionary theory or something like that. So we don't, the territorial thing doesn't really affect us, so we don't see it very much. With administrators or teachers, I think the real challenge that we deal with in terms of bringing out implementation, vision, and strategy is the fact that teachers are woefully overworked and underpaid, and they're asked to do an incredible amount of stuff that distracts them from what it is they probably signed up for.
And administrators have a gigantic weight on their shoulders. First of all, they have to see to it that their teachers are meeting state and federal standards and those kinds of things. One of the things we try to emphasize in our implementation workshops is that integration of faith and science can happen in such a way that it does not have to have sort of a kind of invasive or blank check kind of space in the curriculum. That there are places where it comes up naturally. You can think about, for instance, in standard theological education as envisioned by the USCCB. When you talk about the Old Testament, you talk about Genesis. It's a good place to talk about the relationship between faith and science. When you're dealing with the Big Bang in the science classroom, it's a great place to distinguish between what we mean by the Big Bang and what we mean by the Catholic doctrine of creation and why they're not in conflict. There are various places where this can be done. It's just a matter of finding those places and knowing how to best make this distinction. And I often argue that making those kinds of distinctions and relations are actually conducive to excellent science curricula and excellent religion curricula.
Yeah.
Because you come to understand your discipline better when you're able to distinguish it from and relate it to another.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We answer
and
these kinds
the
of
elements within it as well.
This goes back to the humility that Jay talks about with, you know, which we're so blessed to have these incredible presenters who come who all share that common trait.
Yeah.
You know, they know. This is where, you know what I mean? You don't hear the theologian in one of our panel discussions stepping up and saying, "Excuse me, Steve Barr, particle physicist, please be quiet for a second while I tell you what I think about particle physics."
Right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We're all listening. When Steve's talking about particle physics, we're all listening.
Right. Yeah.
We also then can conjecture with one another. Is this what the church means about this? Or is this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you talk about quantum mechanics, is this what this means or that?
Yeah.
That kind of respectful dialogue is something we want to model for teachers so they can go back to their school and do it.
Right.
And don't tell them I said this because it might work against the humility that they have, but that's why we insist on having
I can excise this part.
Right.
the very best speakers,
Yeah.
the very best researchers in the field who can speak to the science and religion dialogue. I just think about because it's at that level you have kind of watershed distinctions that are introduced. One quick example is when John Cavini, who's a patristic scholar, a remarkable Catholic theologian at Notre Dame, gave an entire kind of keynote on the idea that the doctrine of creation is a revealed doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, because we have no idea what creation means in a theological sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that had to be revealed to us.
Yeah.
One, it's manifestly different than the findings of natural philosophy, that the universe is something that came into existence in some way.
Mm-hmm.
The doctrine of creation is, as revealed, it kind of marks a theological index that we would not have otherwise. And once that was in place and people understood what we're doing, this is not an ersatz explanation.
Mm-hmm.
This is a sophisticated understanding, kind of a texturizing of the world in which we live.
Yeah.
And its origins. And so it's distinctions like that, which when you have some of the best minds in the world on a particular field, telling teachers what they think is important, what's critical to teach this well, magnificent things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just little distinctions that happen like that. And I learn a ton every year just being around these people.
Yeah.
And the teachers, seem to do too. But so you start telescoping out, generations, and you think, okay, we have a crop of students now who in high school are learning something that I didn't learn until at graduate school.
Yeah.
That the doctrine of creation is a revealed doctrine that has import on these particular points.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how cultures are changed.
I'm fascinated by your discussion. It's in the New Orleans foundations where you go and you do some lab work as a part of the, of course, again, thinking of Father Ehrman, but of course also being a geologist, whether hopefully in the days to, in years to come, as this branches out and hopefully gets taken up by more people, whether there might be room for an outdoor, a lab, a descriptive science sort of, maybe geology and ecology sort of.
Definitely, but not in June in New Orleans.
Not in New Orleans, no. You want to stay in that air conditioning.
That's right. We're going to have to find some big.
July in Wyoming, that's a great
something up in
place.
Yosemite or something.
Yosemite.
That Father Terry brings to the table, just like, he gave a presentation last year at Foundations Notre Dame, basically that starts with kind of understanding water systems, water basins, river systems. And was able to draw out of that an incredible amount of theological content, scientific content. It was remarkable. But you're right. We don't do sort of environmental ethical stuff, but talking about ecology as sort of ecological systems has been incredibly interesting and very fruitful for ways of getting at the science and religion question that our participants and program instructors may not have anticipated.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you said your book is the second volume of your book is coming out soon.
Edition.
Yeah. So my last year of my last academic year, 2017, 2018, before I moved here in July,
I
was on sabbatical from Notre Dame Seminary in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Writing the second edition of the textbook.
Okay.
The textbook actually was part of my what we call in Louisiana my Katrina experience.
Okay.
I was invited to propose the curriculum about 6 days after our home was flooded and while we were evacuated to central Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I was the chair of the theology department at a college in New Orleans, Our Lady of Holy Cross College, now the University of Holy Cross.
Yeah.
And didn't think I'd have any time.
Right.
To work on this. Right. I would not have thought I would have any time.
Isn't that something?
And certainly did not feel qualified to do it. But at this particular point, I was wondering even if the college would open again.
Right.
So I said yes.
Yes.
And so the first edition is really representative of the research that I did from 2005 to 2007.
Yeah. Which
was my first foray into the relationship between the Catholic faith and science.
Mm-hmm.
And I attempted to make a kind of an A to Z sort of approach.
Yeah.
I follow the same kind of format here, and now I have the benefit of an additional 12, 13 years of learning and speaking and engaging the topic and doing more research.
Yeah. And
so I'm excited about
people, Father Stephen Barr, whoever.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm excited. Well, Stephen Barr actually wrote the foreword to the first edition. Mm-hmm. And he keeps reminding me, he goes, I haven't read the second edition yet.
Right.
So I hope you didn't mess it up. You did okay with the first one.
And I can picture him saying that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, right. So, but Steve actually, one of his book, Modern Physics and Ancient Faith, was one of the first books I read.
Yeah.
And and by the end of it, I had read many, many more.
Yeah.
And still remained at the top.
One of the best, yeah.
One of, if not the best.
Yeah.
And so, the reason I became friends with Steve Barr is because I, at the end of writing my first draft, I called him.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm this guy, I'm a guy I teach in New Orleans, and I've written this textbook on faith and science for high school. And I had an idea of maybe about 35 pages of the 200-page manuscript that I wanted him to read.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I didn't mess up the science.
Right.
Misunderstand the science.
Yeah.
And Steve was so gracious, he actually said, this is a great idea.
Yeah.
And he read the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, then we began collaborating together on education for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so there's a little, I hope I answered your question.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I'm excited about seeing, something that I feel, has a little bit more depth to it than the first edition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dramatic story of the manner in which God had the call delivered to you.
Yes. I would not be living in the frozen tundra now.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway,
there's
Yeah, but it was definitely a great moment, and a great turning point in my own life. Although at the time, I just simply thought it would be a one-off project that I would do to help the school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting how those things work out.
Yeah, some of them do. Yeah. And sometimes the thing you think is going to be a big splash ends up being that boutique item that,
right. Exactly.
Life is like that. So, yeah. I feel like there's several more podcasts worth of material we can discuss.
Right. Yeah.
But
this has been good. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. This is a great conversation.
Been a tremendous conversation. This has been another episode of That's So Second Millennium with me, Paul Giesting, geologist and intellectual pilgrim, and my co-host, the journalist and consultant, Bill Schmidt. Be sure to check us out at tssm.podbean.com. We hope you subscribe and leave us a review via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Stitcher. As always, thanks for listening.